never know where life will lead us or what may hinder us along the way. But while every day can feel like one big question mark, it doesn't have to. With the right insights, strategies, and solutions from Western and Southern Financial Group, together we can look ahead to leave the unknown behind.
I mean, what's pro football focus doing? Last week they had Brady. This week they got Brady.
We're doing it. We're literally doing it differently from everybody else.
Hey, as a matter of fact, moving forward from this point on, I will not make reference to PFF.
Ready to get into it?
Yeah.
All right. We're going team by team. I would be very careful about slinging stuff. Am I going to get sued?
We got legal on this?
I like football season, and all the things that go with it.
Four snaps was all it took for the Jets' Super Bowl dreams to crumble into a nightmare on Monday night as Aaron Rodgers lay sprawled out on the turf after a routine sack. What do you think, Trev? Trying to cold open today. None of this welcome to the podcast kind of stuff. Just straight into the action.
I won't stand for it. They're going to trade for Jameis Winston. They're going to lock his full potential. The number one pick is going to once again rise. And it's all going to be good in Jets Kingdom.
All right, well, there you go. That's the podcast today. Sam Monson here, Trevor Sikkema in. We're going to be talking all things Aaron Rodgers, all things Monday Night Football debacle that it was. And then we're going to go a little preview of the draft. We're going to start talking about, who QB3 might be. Anyone that's sort of taken a look forward at the upcoming draft, the 2024 draft. Caleb Williams is supposed to be the number one superstar. Drake May is most people's consensus number two. But that number 3 QB spot is kind of up for grabs. And a lot of guys, after a couple of weeks of college football action, have already started to make moves. Trevor Sikkema, part of the NFL Stock Exchange, is already all over it. So we're going to talk a little bit about that later. But first, we got to get into this Monday Night Football thing because, oh my God, what a mess that was.
Dude, so I was telling you a little bit in the pre-show, but I'll give the expanded version here so everybody can hear it. My future father-in-law is a diehard Jets fan, has been a Jets fan since birth. His whole family is Jets fans. And he has long told me about how cursed the Jets franchise is, that they can't have anything nice. When my fiance was doing sports radio, back before Trevor Lawrence got drafted into the NFL, the Jets were looking like they were going to get the number one overall pick in Trevor Lawrence. And he, now famously in our little family, said, I don't want the Jets to get the number one pick. Trevor Lawrence seems like a really nice guy. I really don't want to ruin his career like that. I really don't. So he just believes that the Jets are always cursed. We go to a Jets bar last night, and the energy in that building was insane. When Breece Hall ripped off that 15-20 yard run early, you'd have thought they won the Super Bowl. I mean, I thought the building was going to come down because of how loud the Jets fans were. And then, of course, a play later, 2 plays later, whatever it was, Rodgers hurts his ankle, and it couldn't be any quieter in the building. It couldn't have been any quieter in the stadium. And it's just I am in no way a Jets fan. My heart sunk into my gut because of what we had just watched. And when he had the trainers carry him off the field, you kind of knew that this was not going to be a routine injury. And man, all the talk of the offseason, Hard Knocks, the preseason, everything, man, it sucks. There's no way around it. It sucks that happened just a few snaps into his tenure with the Jets. And so a lot of possibilities that I'm sure we're going to get into here on this show, but man, it sucked to watch last night. Part at least.
Yeah, it really did. It's that was one of the most interesting, biggest storylines in this NFL season. And it got taken away from everybody. Obviously, you feel for Jets fans who thought they finally had a quarterback that could, propel them into contender status and make a run to the Super Bowl and all that kind of stuff. Jets fans were rightfully excited heading into this season, and that disappears. But that's the same with every injury. But for everybody else, it's this was one of the most interesting storylines in the NFL. The rest of us were going to get to see how this Rodgers thing was going to work in New York, whether he was going to be able to be that guy, whether he could be that MVP candidate again, whether he could make the Jets relevant, beat the Bills, all these kinds of things. And that gets taken away from everybody after 4 snaps. That sucks. Injuries happen. most of them I don't think affect the neutral fan as much as this one did.
Right. No, I completely agree with you. Injuries are part of this very violent game. And, we see injuries, like what happened with the Baltimore Ravens, right? What it feels like it happens with the Baltimore Ravens all the time, getting hit by the injury bug. And you sit here and there's no other real reaction other than, damn, that sucks. You wish that we lived in a world where we could just turn injuries off like Madden and we could let teams build the way they want to build. And then you go out and you figure whose roster, whose strategy, whose coaching actually is the best. But we don't get that. It's not a reality to get that in the NFL. And a lot of times when we talk about Super Bowl contenders and playoff contenders, division winners, all that kinds of stuff, you, me, everybody, there's always a caveat. Well, as long as they're healthy, right? As long as they stay healthy. And like we always throw that little sentence in there when we talk about season predictions for teams, because I go back to an example that I know very well. Big reason why the Buccaneers won the Super Bowl when they did with Tom Brady a few years ago is because they were healthy. That offensive line didn't miss any time. The weapons barely missed any time. Like, that entire team was so healthy and playing well together down the stretch that it's almost like it kind of turns into this: whoever survives the regular season the best often makes a lot of noise in the playoffs. Not entirely, but it's just a really crappy part of the game that unfortunately is reality for a lot of teams. But I agree with you. This one hit different. This Rodgers injury hit different. No,
it sucks. Injuries being a part of football is an unfortunate reality. Football, of course, being synonymous with fall weather. You got to secure your financial future, and at least Rodgers did that before getting himself hurt. But the most important task on your fall list should be securing your family's financial future, starting with life insurance. Fabric by Gerber Life makes it quick, easy, and affordable to protect your family so you can get back to enjoying life. Fabric was designed by parents for parents to help you get high-quality, surprisingly affordable term life insurance policy in less than 10 minutes. Fabric has flexible policies that fit your family and your budget, with quality policies like $1 million in coverage for less than $1 a day. Get your personalized quote in just minutes and then apply when it's convenient for you. It's all online and on your schedule. You could go from start to covered in less than 10 minutes with no health exam required. Join the thousands of parents who trust Fabric to protect their family. Apply today in minutes at meetfabric.com/PFFNFL. That's meetfabric.com/PFFNFL. MEET fabric.com/PFFNFL. Policies issued by Western Southern Life Insurance Company, not available in certain states. Prices subject to underwriting and health questions. So, after the absolute bummer that was, Aaron Rodgers going down, the Jets immediately find themselves back to square one, which is Zach Wilson going back in there. And I don't know, when you watch Monday Night Football, are you a main broadcast or a Manning cast guy?
So I go back and forth. Last night I wasn't a Manning cast guy, but I did see the clips of Peyton Manning looking so offended that Zach Wilson would have the audacity to still be in the league voluntarily at this point, that I felt like Peyton himself was going to call up the Jets in the middle of the game, which would have made for great TV, by the way, if he was able to get in touch with Joe Douglas. He was about to call Joe Douglas in the middle of the game and say, "I'm coming in to try out tomorrow." That's what Zach Wilson did to Peyton Manning in the little clips that I saw. So normally I kind of go back and forth, but I did see those clips.
Yeah, Peyton Manning is often disgusted by things that happen on the field, but they tend to be very isolated, small incidents, right? Like an individual mistake here or there, and you see him react viscerally. From the moment it happened, he was just disgusted that Zach Wilson was in the football game, right? And once he was in the football game, he was even more disgusted that they would ever attempt a pass with him in there. It's like, no, don't let Zach Wilson throw the ball. That's the worst thing that can happen. This guy's terrible. He was just annihilating Wilson from start to finish, to the point where even like at some point in the second half, Ryan Fitzpatrick came on. I was like, whoa, let's dial back the negativity here. Like, he's not, the poor kid's doing his best. Like,
it is wild that we're talking about it like this with a former, not that long ago, number 2 overall pick to the team, right? It's not like oh man, Rodgers went down. They have no backup plan.
Right.
Here's an undrafted free agent journeyman who's been on like 18 teams. I mean, shout out to Josh Johnson. I didn't mean for him to catch any sort of stray there with the 18 teams comment. But like, I can't believe it's this point of view with Zach Wilson.
Yeah.
He's number 2 overall pick, man. If your starting quarterback is going to go down, this is actually kind of like the guy you would trade for, right? If Wilson was on another team, we'd probably be sitting here thinking, hey, talented kid, probably needed just a little bit more time in the league. You know, the BYU offense was kind of fake, maybe a little change of scenery. If Zach Wilson wasn't on the Jets, his, I'll say, like, resume for being the next guy up would probably look pretty good. And he's there, and we're getting the Peyton Manning reaction where he's like, yeah, Zach Wilson should throw the ball 3 more times for the game when there's like 13 minutes to go in the
right. I mean, Peyton Manning, Mr. Quarterback advocate, was essentially saying, do not let him attempt a pass in this game. Like, run the ball for the rest of the game, even though they're down, right? It's not like they had the lead and they were protect. Like, they was literally saying, no good can come from Zach Wilson attempting passes in this game. Don't even try it, which is wild for a guy who, as you say, was the number 2 overall pick. And he might not have been wrong. Like, Robert Saleh comes out after the game. You know, I don't think it's yet been confirmed that Rodgers has a torn Achilles, but that's what everybody is expecting and fearing, which means he's done for the year. Robert Saleh has essentially said Zach Wilson is the starter for the rest of the season. That can't possibly be true, right?
Yeah, and you know, I don't know how deep you want to get into this with potential quarterback options for the Jets, but basically every name that was a non-zero chance of happening was thrown out last night.
Right.
Like we had so many different options, and it just doesn't feel like that can be the case. You've got to at least put a lot of work into looking into if you look into a lot of these other options, and you know, trading for some of these guys might be too much. You know, you don't want to give up the draft capital or whatever it is, or you know, you figure, I don't know their exact salary cap off the top of my head. Maybe we'll have to get Brad Spielberger on the line here, like Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. But I don't know exactly what their cap situation is, but I got to think that they're pretty close to the floor, given the fact that they were trying to contend for a Super Bowl this year. So I don't know what the options are money-wise with some of these other better options that might be out there that might even be available for a trade. So my point is, though, is that you have to look into everything. Whether it's a free agent who's not on a team right now, whether it's a guy like Matt Ryan who's in a broadcast booth, whether it's Philip Rivers who's probably out in a ranch somewhere, like, you got to look into all of these options, because unfortunately, even though I don't seem to be as negative as Peyton Manning was, they're not going to get to where they want to go with Wilson this year. Like, it's just not going to happen. And if you want any chance of having that again, or something close to what it would have been with Rodgers, you got to look elsewhere, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to get onto it in a little bit, but they shouldn't have won that game. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. This should have been a loss, and there's no way the set of circumstances that resulted in them winning this game is going to repeat, you know, throughout the season. Like, if that is the level your offense is going to be without Aaron Rodgers, you're going to need a better solution to that. Now, look, there's always mitigating circumstances, right? Like, Zach Wilson won't have taken any first-team reps during the week. He came in cold, all those kinds of things. He'll have a better preparation for the next game in that they know he's starting. They can give him some work and get him ready. But I feel like we've seen enough of Zach Wilson to know that that's probably not a great option for them going forward. And there's almost certainly better options out there, whether it is trading for somebody like Jameis Winston. Carson Wentz's career has gone off the rails, but Carson Wentz is sitting around waiting for a phone call. Like, there are options out there, and it feels like a team that was expecting to be a Super Bowl contender has to do something at quarterback and can't really roll with Zach Wilson. What would your solution be? What's your top 3 wish list?
There's a lot of different ways that you could attack this, right? I mean, you could go, all right, most realistic option, best option, funniest option, like, okay, if money doesn't matter, kind of. And like, there's so many different ways that you can approach what the Jets might do here. I think.
All right, well, hang on. With that said, give me your most likely option, your best option, and the funniest option. Give me one for each.
It feels like most likely option is either Carson Wentz or Joe Flacco, because they're not on teams right now.
Right.
You could call them up, you get them in the building immediately, and it just kind of comes down to me, like, okay, does Joe Douglas want to spin the wheels again with Joe Flacco, or does he want to try something else? And I feel like, unfortunately, that those are probably the most realistic. Maybe you throw Matt Ryan in there as well. I don't really know the Phillip Rivers thing. I think that Phillip Rivers is retired. I don't know. I don't really think that that's super realistic, but I feel as though one of those veteran guys is probably the most realistic. The best option for them, I think, is Jameis Winston. I really do, because you've at least got to roll the dice. You know, certainly, I think truly best case scenario, money doesn't matter, Matt Stafford, right? It would have helped, I think, if the Rams wouldn't have looked so good this past weekend, because I don't know if they're going to want to move on from him. But if you get a couple of weeks into the season here and the Rams start losing some games and they realize, hey, we are full turn of the page. I know Stafford's contract is huge, but like, if money doesn't matter and they can figure it out, that's the best option, no question about it, of like guys that could actually elevate this team to get to a level. But I don't know how realistic it is. Jameis Winston to me is much more realistic because the contract's not very much. It probably wouldn't cost you that much in draft capital to go get him. And this is somebody who has obviously won games in this league before. Now, there's a reason why he's a backup, of course, but no option at this point of the season to address what the Jets need to address is going to be perfect. And I think that you would probably take the swing of the bat with Jameis Winston, because there's a handful of other guys like, Jacoby Brissett, I think, is something that comes to mind. Gardner Minshew is another guy that comes to mind. Nick Foles is somebody else that comes to mind. But at that point, what are you really doing? Do you think those quarterbacks can actually get you where you want to go? I'm not saying Jameis Winston gives you the easiest or straightest path to where you want to go, but at least he has the arm to say, hey, we can make the most out of this passing offense when we need to hit our deep shots. If he really has turned down the turnovers since his Buccaneer days, we've got a good enough running game that we saw last night to be able to put up some decent points. And we have a defense that could be the best defense in the NFL. So that's the one that I look at and I think makes the most sense. But the one that would be the best for them, in my opinion, is Stafford. I just don't really know how realistic that is.
Yeah, I feel like you're right. The most likely options are probably stuff like Joe Flacco. Joe Flacco might be the single most likely option. Carson Wentz, I think, is another obvious one that makes a lot of sense. The best option for them, it might be Jameis. You're going to be looking simply through availability. You're going to be looking at those top backups in the NFL type tier, and you list off a couple of them there. Teddy Bridgewater is another name that always sort of circulates in that kind of category.
And so for those guys, I don't mean to cut you off, but like Bridgewater, Brissett, Gardner Minshew, like guys like that, Nick Foles, you might be raising the floor from what Zach Wilson gives you, but how much are you actually raising the ceiling? Because at that point, how much is the draft pick worth? I don't know exactly where those conversations are going to start with compensation. Maybe they don't really care. Maybe they think that raising the floor is the most important part. But to me, for a team that had Super Bowl aspirations, you got to give it a shot.
Right.
I think you got to take a bigger swing at the bat than that.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, is those guys they're top backups for a reason. And in the AFC, in particular in the AFC East, getting even just viable quarterback play is no good to you. Like, they need better than that. They need something that's capable of going toe-to-toe with the special type quarterbacks that they're going to be running into. As for the funniest options, the two funniest options to me are trades within the division. Number one, trading to get Mike White back from the Dolphins would be hilarious.
Okay. Okay.
And number two, because Mike White is the perennial Jet savior, right? Everything unravels.
Mike
White,
Hall of Famer. He's got gear in the Hall of Fame.
It all unravels. Mike White steps in and for 2.5 games looks like an All-Pro and then gets injured and we never get to see it again. So that would be pretty funny. And then the Jets flipping like an absurd draft pick to the Patriots for Mac Jones would just be hysterical. And the Patriots just throwing Mac Jones out the door to get a draft pick from the Jets. You can't tell me that isn't the funniest thing that could happen.
I think Tom Brady is the more likely potential Patriots quarterback that would play for the Jets, actually. But I don't know how likely that one is either. Brady is. It seems like he's always picking up the phone and calling about opportunities. Yeah. So I wonder if that one actually happens.
Here's one that Brady putting his ownership thing on hold to play for the Jets in an emergency role would be insane.
So I see a couple people in the chat. Like some people are talking about Dorian Thompson-Robinson from the Browns. Some people are talking about Aiden O'Connell from the Raiders. I don't really think the Jets would make either of those moves because as good as those guys looked in the preseason, it's preseason and they're rookies.
Yeah.
So I don't think that they would even find those moves viable or upgrades over Wilson, I think, from where they're currently at. This is an option that I thought about that would be crazy, that would take a lot of moving parts that I haven't seen. Kirk Cousins. Because the Vikings, I think it's pretty clear they're going to move on from Kirk Cousins at the end of the season.
Yeah.
He's got 1 year left on his deal. I think there's some money that you could probably move around a little bit, especially if Galaxy branding here. The Jets are going to keep their first-round pick because they don't have to give it to the Packers because Rodgers, we assume, is not going to play 65% of the snaps because we assume he's going to be out for the season. That means that they are sending their second-round pick, I think, to the Green Bay Packers, right?
Yeah.
If they were already operating thinking that they were not going to have their first-round pick, if you go to Minnesota and you basically say, we'll give you a first-round pick for Kirk, but you have to pay, like most of the money, if not all of the money, basically just has to stay on your books. You're basically giving to us for free. And they're operating as if they did not have the first round pick anyways, and they're going to get Kirk Cousins, and then Kirk Cousins is their quarterback.
That would be a really interesting pitch to the Vikings because the Vikings would essentially they would have to accept, we're tanking the season right now, right here and right now, because this offer has come along and it involves a first-round pick, and we can start like a real rebuild right now. It's happening in week 2 of the NFL season. That for most teams, I would imagine they would immediately just put the phone down and say, get the hell out of here. But with the Vikings being run by Kwesi, an analytics-minded, a financial-minded kind of guy, I do kind of wonder. I would like to see his reaction to that. Even if they ended up saying no, I would like a camera on that conversation within the Vikings front office to see how that would go. That would be an absolutely wild move if it happened.
I think you offer the Rams that deal for Stafford first, but for Stafford, it's a little bit more complicated because Stafford's got multiple years on his contract after this. So that's a little bit more complicated. You probably try to do something like that to make it work for Stafford because the Rams are already in the business of basically trading draft picks for money, right? They did it for Jared Goff. That's kind of how they went about doing that and overpaying with draft picks so they didn't have to pay as much compensation. So I think you do that with LA first, but I did think about Kirk Cousins for that as well. And for as much as people can hate on Kirk on this Jets team, I mean, you're right back in the conversation. You're not exactly where you were with Aaron Rodgers, but you're back in the conversation for, okay, you can win enough games to make it into the playoffs, be competitive, and then let's see what happens with this really good defense behind you.
So it would be remiss to move on from this game without covering what in God's name happened to Josh Allen. Like, what was he doing in this game? So there was a moment, I think it was his first interception. He started the game fine, was, moving the ball around, throwing accurately, hitting receivers, and then went with just a sort of crazy, random YOLO deep pass right into a safety. And Peyton Manning's reaction to that was, he's like, hey, Eli, Josh Allen talked to me, and he told me he was going to be patient and not, get aggressive and not get overconfident with the deep ball. He lied to me. He lied. And that's exactly what happened. He went straight into being old Josh Allen with forcing the ball into these crazy situations. And that reminded me a lot of, remember, was it his first playoff game against Houston where late in the game he ends up with some ridiculous offload lateral when he was upside down being tackled trying to hit a tight end, and you're like, what? No, too much. Like, too much aggression. Just rein it back in a bit. And then he did. He managed to sort of get himself together, over the next couple of years and became slightly different. But he's been slowly sliding back in that direction over the last, season and a half or so.
Yeah. I looked up some numbers before this because as I was watching the game, I watched the first interception from Josh Allen. I was like, damn, okay, he's taking a shot. That's kind of just how Josh Allen is. Then I was watching the second one, then the third, and I got to a point where I'm like, what is he doing? Yeah. Does this team realize Aaron Rodgers got hurt on his fourth snap? The game was yours. There's no energy. There's no momentum. This team's completely flustered. All you had to do was not give them the ball. And not only did they do that, they did that multiple times. I think Sean McDermott even said after the game they had two opponents this week, the Jets and themselves. That's how bad it was. And obviously, Josh Allen has the quote, the same shit, different year or different day, whichever one he used. I can't remember which word he used, but it was true, man. So I looked this up. Speaking of Jameis Winston, everybody points to Jameis as the ultimate, gunslinger gone too far. He gets to the point where you're turning the ball over too much, and that, it was a fine line, but it got to the point where Tampa couldn't bring him back. It was obviously too bad. Certainly the 30-for-30 year was insane in that regard. Jameis Winston from 2018 to 2019. So the 2019 was the 30-for-30 season. So I'm including the year before that to give us a 2-year window. He had 63 total interceptions and fumbles. Now, it doesn't include fumbles that his own team recovered. I'm just saying, fumbles and interceptions, he had 63. Josh Allen from 2021, so 2021 and 2022, those full seasons, and then if you include last night as well, he's got 55. Jameis had 63, he's got 55. If you just go to turnover-worthy plays, Jameis in those 2 years had 62 turnover-worthy plays. Josh Allen from 2021 to the beginning of 2023 has 64. He has 2 more turnover-worthy plays. Now, he's got more playoff games, so he's played more games. The turnover-worthy percentage for Jameis is 5.1. Turnover-worthy percentage for Josh Allen is just 3.6. So that's a massive difference in percentage. But that's what we're talking about with the volume of putting the ball in harm's way. And Josh is getting to the point where he's not getting to the point. We're here. You just have to accept that this is who he is. You got to try to rein it in a little bit, but he's never going to be this cerebral, really takes care of the ball. It's just not in his DNA. He's too much of a crazy athlete with his arm and his legs that he's not going to not believe he's Superman. And the moment that he stops believing he's Superman, you're not going to get the incredible amount of big-time throws that he also gives you. So this is the give and take game, man. You're going to have some unreal games from Josh Allen, and you're going to have some games like last night that you absolutely should have won, and he's the guy who's got to shoulder a lot of that.
It's like Peyton Manning pulling his hair out at the idea that the Jets were willing to attempt a pass with Zach Wilson at quarterback. They were down 10 points, so they had to do something. The Bills, though, at the point you're up 10 points, Zach Wilson is the opposing quarterback. The talk about Zach Wilson is they can't let him throw the ball. You shouldn't have thrown a ball at all. The Bills would have won that game if they hadn't attempted a pass from the point they were 10 points up for the rest of the game. You could argue they'd have won the game if they had quick kicked on first down every time they got the ball and just played territory. Josh Allen handed that game back to the Jets every single time, pretty much. I asked at one point late in the game when he had the fumble, does he have money on the Jets? What the hell is happening here?
Dude, what about I don't think this is the same play. The scramble where he's 7 yards before the line of scrimmage and he jumps into 3 Jets tacklers. And it's Josh, what are you doing? That was one of the most, I don't think all Josh Allen games are going to look like that, right? I'm obviously critical of him this morning, but they're not all going to look like that. The problem is that possibility even exists.
Right.
That you are leaping in the air to try to hurdle one Jets defender while 2 others are helicopter tackling you, and you're 7 yards before the first down mark on third down. That's one of those things where you just got to go, dude.
Yeah.
You can't be doing this.
But I think the bigger problem is that it happened in a game like yesterday when it clearly didn't need to, right? There are some games where it's in the balance, it's fine, it's close. You can understand why he would get carried away and think he needs to do that. From very early in that game yesterday, obviously, with Rodgers, it was quite clear that all you need to do is not screw it up. Just don't do anything idiotic and you win the game. Anything. And even once you'd made the first, then you would think that the first shot, the arm punt that ends up being picked off, you're like, okay, that should be a lesson. That was too far. Let's overcorrect even more and make sure I don't do that again, because that's the only way the Jets win this game. And somehow instead of that, he kept digging and just kept going deeper and deeper. You're like, dude, what? Of all the games, this should be the one that's easiest to pull back from that brink and just become a little bit more conservative. The fact that he couldn't control himself under those circumstances, I think, is a really big red flag, because he's been moving in this direction for a while again. Last season, he led the league in turnover-worthy plays. Like you said, he has a lot of attempts, so it's not the highest rate in the world, but it's higher than it can be, right? And it's higher than it needs to be if he's going to be in the conversation with Patrick Mahomes and, the best quarterbacks in the NFL. He had a 2-year window where his turnover-worthy play rate dropped into the 3% range, right? 3.5 and then 3.2. That's fine. That's in the Dak Prescott range of, sure, it's higher than the best quarterbacks in the NFL, but he more than makes up for it with the big throws. Where it becomes problematic is where you get above 4%, and, rookie Josh Allen was 5. The next year it was 4.3. Last year it was back up to 4.2. If you're in the 4s, that's a lot of negative plays to have to offset with some special plays. And last night it was 7.8%. It was ridiculous. So they have to find a way of reining him in from that. You cannot, as good as he is and as talented as he is, that can't fly. That is Jameis Winston-esque, and there's a reason that Jameis Winston threw for 5,000 yards, and they still went, no thanks, this is too much.
Right, and I when I brought up Jameis Winston, I talked about the fine line. I was working at Pewter Report covering the team as a beat reporter during that time, and it was months or just a year prior, he had a deal on the table to be a very highly paid multi-year contract quarterback. Jameis Winston did. And Josh Allen obviously gets paid as well, but the line is so fine when you are looking at guys who are these gunslingers who you love the fearlessness, but I think it makes, not to make everything about Patrick Mahomes, but it makes you appreciate Patrick Mahomes so much more, because Mahomes has the arm to be Superman. He has the arm to fit the ball into some crazy windows and just do some unbelievable stuff throwing the ball. But Mahomes also really understands when he needs to do that and when he doesn't. And I think the problem with guys like Josh Allen or Jameis Winston is they just think they've got to do that all the time. And they think that because that's their ability and identity, hey, I'm a gunslinger. They don't want to take this away from me. They want me to push the ball down the field. That means you got to do it in all situations. And Mahomes was like that at Texas Tech. That's what made him such a polarizing prospect, is that he didn't really know how to turn it off. You had full good and full bad all the time. But under Andy Reid's tutelage, and certainly his own growth as well, he became this quarterback to where not only does he have the ability to do it whenever he wants, he also has the football IQ to know that he doesn't have to. And I think that's the biggest detractor from Josh Allen, is that he's missing that patience or that poise, awareness to know that just because he can doesn't mean he has to. Yeah. That was a Jameis Winston story as well. And that's always the fight that you're going to have to fight when it comes to these crazy arm talented quarterbacks. who have the ability to do some really impressive stuff.
And I agree. Like it is worth bringing up and re-emphasizing that it is a fine line. Like we make this black and white and we sort of oversimplify it, and it's very reductionist to just say like you're either Patrick Mahomes or you're Jameis Winston, right? But the fact that Josh Allen, it's a really difficult thing for Buffalo and Josh Allen to manage because his ability to take over individually during a play and make something special happen, either with his arm, with his legs, with his size, like all of the different elements he brings to the table, that's what makes him special. And when he puts it all together, that's what results in a quarterback that can go toe-to-toe with Patrick Mahomes and anybody else in the NFL. But he's going too far, right? He's erring into Jameis Winston territory too often, and figuring out where that balance is difficult. Just the really worrying thing is, last night of all games, he wasn't able to rein himself back in. That, I think, is a massive concern for not just Josh Allen, but for the Bills and for the whole area there. It has been, by the way, officially confirmed now that Rodgers is son's Achilles. So done for the year. 4 snaps was how long the experiment lasted in New York, and now we're on to Zach Wilson and/or alternatives.
Free James.
All right, let's start talking about these 2024 draft quarterbacks.
Sure.
So I asked you for a short list because, as people know, I'm not the biggest college football fan in the world. I've been dabbling, though. Look, there's been some, storylines over 2 weeks that's caused me to dip in on a Saturday when I'm, mowing the lawn and doing other crap around the house. So I've watched a little bit of some of these guys, and then you gave me a little short list of people to watch. I hit up the late Michael Renner. I was like, who's QB3?
Dead.
No, he is. Anyone that leaves PFF, they're the late. Late Austin Gale, late Mike Renner, late Eric Eager, all dead to us, right?
Oh.
So we must refer to them in the past tense. But I hit him up anyway and asked Renner who the QB3 was. And Renner added Bo Nix to your list. Now, I know you had a further expanded list of guys, right? The actual list of guys that could be QB3 is like 10 players long.
It's crazy.
So the short list we're working from is Quinn Ewers from Texas, J.J. McCarthy from Michigan, Bo Nix from Oregon, and Shedeur Sanders from Colorado. Let me start with Quinn Ewers because I don't know much about him other than, like, up until recently, my main exposure to Quinn Ewers was the mullet. So, but he has, but he's got pedigree, right? He was at Ohio State, now he's at Texas. Like, those are 2 pretty big programs, and he's been sitting in front of some, big time players, like big time prospects. Arch Manning, right? The biggest recruit ever is sitting buried on that Texas depth chart. So give me a little bit of a backstory of Quinn Ewers.
Yeah, so Quinn Ewers in the 2021 recruiting class was QB1, ahead of a guy that you may have heard of before named Caleb Williams. So that just goes to show you like how much potential people saw in Quinn Ewers when he was coming out of high school.
Right.
When I was with the Draft Network, before I came over to PFF, we covered an event out in California, Steve Clarkson's quarterback camp, and Quinn Ewers was actually there. So I get to see him throw in person. Now, this is still when he was a high school senior, so it was even before he went to Ohio State. The way that this ball rocketed out of his hand, I was like, holy cow. He was just truly messing around. He didn't have to really try to be the most impressive person at that camp. So he's doing like Matthew Stafford Mahomes stuff, man. He's just side throwing it. He's just like flicking it with no throwing motion, whatever. And the ball's going exactly where it needs to go with pace, velocity. And it was incredibly impressive. He goes to Ohio State, redshirts there, doesn't really play, ends up coming back to Texas, has an opportunity to start right away. He had a big moment against Alabama last year where he looked pretty good. He looked pretty fearless. And then he ended up getting hurt against Alabama. So if you combine the beginning of the year with the end of the year when he's able to come back from injury, Ewers definitely showed you a little bit of that arm strength, but the consistency was not there for him. The fundamentals are sometimes all over the place for him when it comes to like follow through and where/when in his release the ball was kind of coming out of his hands. And it leads to some, I don't want to say like poor accuracy. He definitely had some accuracy issues, but more importantly, ball placement. When you've got to be able to place the ball in a specific spot, which is an NFL trait that is a requirement of all starters to succeed at that level, that was not there for him yet. So you could tell that he was still just kind of playing backyard football. But I think last year he learned that backyard football, even for a player as talented as him, was not going to be enough. Certainly when it came to getting where he wants to go at the college level and making him the type of NFL draft prospect he wanted to be. This year, he cuts the mullet. He's a clean cut guy. He shaves the beard. Now the beard's a little bit more organized. He's got a nice buzz cut to him. And he looks more put together, prepared, and disciplined as a prospect as well. And I think we saw that in the Alabama game this past weekend. He was still that fearless thrower, but he was somebody who played pretty well under pressure. The adjusted completion percentage was good. And especially when hitting the deep ball, that's when some of that accuracy would fall for him, is when he had to push it a little bit further. He was not as pinpoint and as accurate. He was better this past weekend. And I think that was a big step in the right direction. So if you're looking for somebody with arm talent, this dude, it has been number one on his report since his high school days as a recruit.
I don't know if this is something that he's changed or if he's always done this, but one thing I noticed from watching him so far this season is he puts an incredible amount of air under his deep ball. And he seems to be quite inaccurate deep down the field laterally. Like, the ball will not necessarily go to where the wide receiver is tracking, but he puts so much air under it, the receiver is able to change, right, and run under it and adjust and essentially move laterally and make it look like an absolute dime. Vertically, he seems to be accurate. Like, he's going to hit the guy relatively in stride, but it might be 5 yards to the right of where he was headed for with the time where Ewers ended up releasing the ball. I think generally that's quite a smart tactic. Like, if you're able to be accurate vertically, you have a lot of wiggle room on deep balls laterally because you're usually only running with one DB. As long as you get it in the ballpark, your receiver can track that ball and go make it look like an absolute dime. So if that's something he's always done, that's pretty interesting. And if it's something he's changed, it's actually even more interesting because it means he's sort of deliberately fixing a flaw with a pretty smart adjustment.
I do think that that's something, now that you mention it, that I do see a lot from him. Like, even in the early stages of him starting at Texas last year, he is somebody who is, he's kind of going back to that backyard football style. He's kind of like that 500 game quarterback where he's just going to go give his guy a shot. He's basically yelling out 500 before he throws it deep down there. And to your point, if he puts enough air under it, his guy's always got a shot. The less air that you put on it, the more that you put it on a frozen rope. Sure, you might be able to hit a guy in stride and maximize the separation when you recognize it, but it also demands that the ball placement is exquisite. And when you just put a lot of air under it, sometimes you're just, not only are you giving your guy a chance to go get it, when you put a lot of air under the ball, you also bring in pass interference, right? Because when you're 30, 40 yards downfield and you're just putting a ton of air under deep passes, sometimes DBs are going to lose where the wide receiver's at or lose where the ball is, or they can't find it. And so they're just kind of flailing and maybe you'll get a defense pass interference call. So I don't know how on purpose it is. I really don't, but it is a good strategy, I guess.
He seemed to be, from all the guys I looked at, he seemed to be the one with the most unconventional and unique mechanics. Like,
correct.
He had a very sort of compact, quick delivery, but most of the time it was at that three-quarter sidearm thing. And a lot of the times when the sidearm thing he seemed to do just because he could, and a lot of the times when he's trying to put touch on those sidearm passes, the ball comes out in a weird way. He almost like loses it too high, right? He's sort of throwing sidearm, so his hand is coming out.
It's like up here. It's like side, but it's above the shoulder.
Yeah,
is what he
but
does.
his hand ends up underneath the ball, so it seems to push it upwards. Like, almost every single pass he missed was because he was putting too much air under it, and not even on the deep balls, just on stuff that he was trying to hit underneath. The weird delivery seemed to float the ball too much, and that was a problem at times. All right, talk to me about Shedeur Sanders, because Colorado, Deion Sanders, everything that's going on there at the moment is kind of crazy. One of the biggest storylines in college football, Deion going from Jackson State, going to Colorado, essentially bringing a team with him through the transfer portal, and now they look like one of the best teams in college football. And, they're making a lot of noise deliberately, right? Like, they want the hype. They want the buzz. They want the attention. And that includes, Shedeur Sanders, a quarterback who's talking about Matt Rule and, all these kinds of things pre and post game. So they're coming with a lot of like fairly obnoxious attitude. So I came in not wanting to like him. He's really good. Really good.
No, he is. Look, so first of all, what he's doing is nothing new. I mean, you go back to the last 2 years of him starting at Jackson State, 2021 and 2022. He had an adjusted completion percentage of, I think, around 60 or 76 when he was a first-year starter for them. And then it was in the 80s last year. Well, now it's 83% of an adjusted completion percentage. So that is incredibly high. That's an incredibly high number. And it speaks to the timing, the accuracy, how well he's able to go through his progressions, where he knows his receivers are going to be, obviously the ball placement. It's just all through the roof for him right now. I went into the season with Sanders, and I was impressed with the Jackson State tape. But I wondered, okay, when you'll go up against Power 5 competition, especially in the trenches, does that time to throw get a little bit faster? Are you dealing with pressure a little bit more? How does that affect how you go through things? Like, are you a little bit slower? Are you going to be reacting? Is the accuracy and the decision-making, is that going to take a dip? Well, it clearly has not here in the early parts of this season. He has been a cerebral assassin with where the ball is going and how it is getting there. And that has been unbelievably impressive. I had him as sort of like a fringe, I would say, day 3, day 2 prospect, someone like a third, fourth round pick going into the season, because as much as I loved the accuracy from him, it felt like he had to kind of put his full body into it to really push balls down the field beyond 40 yards when it came to having that velocity and distance combination. And, that arm talent is what people talk about. And I wondered how much was there for him. And even though I still have that in my mind, because arm talent just doesn't magically change, how accurate this guy is, how incredible he has been under pressure, because he's the number one FBS quarterback that we have graded under pressure right now. He has the most passing yards under pressure, and I think he has the top 5 adjusted completion percentage under pressure as well. So dealing with pressure at a phenomenal level and being able to put the ball exactly where it needs to go almost always, that stuff plays. The mental processing and just precision from him isn't just good. It's not just like, oh yeah, we'll check those boxes for him. They are A+ things for him. They are statements on his scouting report. And so even if you don't have the greatest arm in the world, if you are this much of an assassin with the football when it comes to ball placement and accuracy, you can play in the league. So if he keeps doing this throughout the course of this season, man, we're going to talk about him as potentially a QB3 first-round quarterback in his class.
Of the 4 guys that I was watching, and look, it's first look for me, so it's only initial impressions, but I was most impressed by Sanders of the 4. Like I was really impressed by him. I thought his arm looked really good. He doesn't uncork it that often. Like I think he deliberately does not put a lot into a lot of these throws. He's more interested in the accuracy, and like he varies his throws more than any of these other guys, whether it's trajectory, touch, velocity, like the number of different types of throws he has deliberately and consciously throughout the course of a game is way more than any of these other guys. Like J.J. McCarthy from Michigan, who we'll get onto, it's like every pass he attempts is like the bullet pass from Madden, right? All I know is hold down the button. That's all I'm doing. Whereas everything Sanders does is varied. But I thought like every now and again you'll get to a throw where he's like, okay, this one needs the full bar. And yes. I was impressed. Like when he unleashes it, it's powerful, the arm.
Dude, he is somebody who, it's tough not to get caught too much up into this, because you love watching prospects and thinking that there's still something in the tank.
Right.
When you watch somebody and you feel like they're close to their ceiling, even if the ceiling's really high, sometimes you have a chance to, or sometimes you have a tendency to like not think as highly of them because you don't need as much imagination. With Sanders, he is so fundamentally sound with every throw that even if I think that his arm talent isn't as great as some other guys in this class, he gets the most out of what he has physically because of how good his fundamentals are. And I think that is also something that is worth noting and something that is incredibly impressive about who he is as a quarterback.
Yeah, I felt a little bit like, so Bryce Young, I think a lot of people underestimate how good his arm is because it doesn't look like he's putting effort into the throws. Like the ball seems to come out of his hand disproportionate relative to the effort he looks like he's putting into it, right? The other end of that spectrum is Ryan Fitzpatrick, who every throw he's ever attempted looked like he was draining his entire life essence to try and get the ball 15 yards away, right? But Bryce Young, it's like it doesn't look like he's putting any effort at all, and yet somehow it leaps out of his hand and actually goes way further and more powerfully than you expect it to. Sanders felt like that, and it wasn't just the throwing. Like everything he did looked easy. Like he would just sort of slide around and evade defenders and skid out of their way and, just put on a small little burst of acceleration, outrun them. Man, again, it's only a couple of games. It's the first games I've seen of him, but he looked really impressive. I thought he was very, very good. Let's get on to J.J. McCarthy, Michigan. I know nothing of this guy, so other than the games I watched. So give me a little bit of background.
So McCarthy, you talk about arm talent, this guy's got it. He is somebody who, he could flick the wrist and the ball was going on a frozen rope to somebody on the opposite hash or even outside the numbers towards the sideline. I mean, McCarthy's best throws you could put up there with anybody in the class, and you will be wowed. You could say, all right, those play on Sunday, and they absolutely do. I had him lower than most people going into the season because last year, Michigan's schedule was decently easy, and the times in which he faced tougher competition and especially faced pressure, he wasn't good. I mean, the accuracy wasn't good. The adjusted completion percentage wasn't good. The passing grade wasn't good. I mean, it was all over the place for him. He felt like a guy who had a lot of talent throwing the ball, but just didn't know how to play that quarterback position yet. That internal clock in the back of his head, it was not calibrated correctly. How he navigated the pocket when pressure was coming, he just didn't have that feel, those instincts. Now, those are all things that could get better with time, but it's never a guarantee. So I was a little bit lower on him going into the year because those are major make or break things for me. If you can't handle pressure, especially at the college level, especially at the Big Ten level when you're in Michigan, it's not going to get easier at the NFL level. And right. I think some of these rookie quarterbacks, we're seeing that even early in their rookie careers like we do every year. But McCarthy, 2 games into this season, looks a lot more comfortable navigating the pocket, moving around the pocket, adjusting to some pressure, even though the competition he's gone up against hasn't been super stout, super imposing. But you see it right there, man. He's first in overall grade, first in passing grade. He's got 5 big-time throws, doesn't have any turnover-worthy plays. The adjusted completion percentage is great. And so it's all going according to plan for McCarthy. And right now, we are simply seeing the best version of him. And moving forward, it's simply going to be, hey, I got the Ohio State game circled, and then I think that this team's going to win the Big Ten championship. So I think the Big Ten championship will be circled. You'll have the 2 college football playoff games if they make it to the national championship. Those are the ones that are going to weigh a lot to me when it comes to judging J.J. McCarthy.
Yeah, I thought he looked really good. I thought his arm looks absolutely legit, and not just. So one of the things, it's relatively easy to have a big, powerful arm from your base, right? From your stable platform when your feet are under you and you can just step into the throw and fire it, right? A lot of players can do that. What's difficult for players sometimes is when you don't have your feet under you, can you still generate velocity and torque and zip, just from your upper body, essentially? Like, obviously, Mahomes is probably the best example of that, right? A guy who can generate seemingly the same power from effectively any possible platform, whether or not his feet are under him at all. McCarthy seems to be able to torque his body and just arm a ball with good accuracy and velocity, which enables him to do a lot that other quarterbacks can't do, because he can kind of skip into a little bit of space in the pocket and then just fire the ball in with his arm in a way other quarterbacks can't, right? They need their feet under them. So I was impressed by that. Really, everything about him I thought was good. The only criticism I have is that the opposite of that Sanders thing, where there's no variance to his throws. Everything is a bullet pass. If he can just develop that, learn when to put some touch on it, when to, give it. Because sometimes the bullet pass is just simply not helpful for your own receivers. Give them a better chance to A, catch it, and B, run into some space by putting a bit of air under it. There were a couple of passes in the most recent game. Was it UNLV? Where there's a window there, and he actually sort of took it away by trying to fire it in on a rope. Like, it didn't give the receiver any chance, with the trajectory to let the ball come in over a defender. It basically blocked the window by putting a defender between him and the receiver.
And that is something that I love that you pointed out, because it's not something that I noted, but now that you say that, I go, actually, yeah, you're right. There's a lot of instances where he's just, like you said, mashing the button in Madden and trying to fire it in there. And touch is a very, very important part of quarterback scouting reports. Like, you have to be able to throw with touch at the NFL level, whether it's 5 yards down the field, 10 yards, 20, 40, 60, whatever it is. Like, you have to be able to put the appropriate amount of touch on passes. The game is too fast at the NFL level. Defenders are too good.
Yeah.
You're not going to be able to zip it in there every time. And being able to put touch on passes is really important. So that's something that I'm going to watch moving forward. I love that you caught that.
But the good thing, I think, is it's probably easier to take a guy who's got the arm to get it into any window and, like, teach him when to just have a bit of self-control and put a bit of air under it than it is to take a guy who's got great accuracy but doesn't have the arm to get it into that window. Like, maybe you can increase the arm strength and the power and work on it, but it's probably a hell of a lot harder than it is to take a guy who's already got all of that ability and say, hey, this one, just take a little bit of, just a little bit of percentage off it. Just put a bit of air under it.
That's why the joke or the bit continues to run every year. The NFL takes these big, giant, tall quarterbacks. Why? Because they have the biggest arms. And because they think to themselves, we can hone in on this guy. Bringing back to Josh Allen's conversation, right?
Yeah.
Josh Allen out of Wyoming, I mean, that tape was nuts. I mean, the tape was all over the place with terrible decisions and bad throws and bad accuracy all over the place. But the Bills said to themselves, we're going to take this guy and we're going to groom him. We're going to have it dial it down a little bit. And the times that Josh Allen's able to dial it down, and shoot, even the times that he's not, he still gives you those unbelievable throws that, maybe only 1, 2, 3 guys in the world can make. And teams are always going to shoot for those types of players. So even though I think that McCarthy is further away from being a sure thing NFL quarterback, I believe that the league is going to be really high on him no matter what.
Yeah. Okay, last guy to cover in deference to the late Michael Renner. Bo Nix. Again, don't know a ton about him other than he was at Auburn previously, and he's been in college for like the last 58 years. Give me some Bo Nix lowdown.
So Bo Nix was horrible at Auburn. He started as a true freshman. Really felt like kind of like a legacy move. Like, I believe his dad played at Auburn, and it just felt like it was like this legacy. Like, just next in line, and now he's starting for Auburn. Great stuff. I mean, he had one good half against Oregon his first year as a starter in the very first game, and people were like, this dude's incredible. He somehow was able to squeeze another 2.5 years as a starter out of that one game because he was really bad the next 2.5 years. I was pretty much done talking about Bo Nix like 2 years ago. Right. I was like, don't talk to me about the NFL with this guy. He cannot process the way that he needs to. The accuracy is bad. The decision-making is not there. He's a good athlete with his legs, and he's got a really nice arm. But to me, it doesn't matter. The decision-making was terrible. He moves on from Auburn, goes to Oregon, and I didn't get to watch a lot of Oregon football, frankly, because I'm on the East Coast, so you just don't get to see a lot of it. When I went to go watch Bo Nix for summer scouting, and I watched 4 or 5 of his games from last year, I couldn't believe this was the same player. I could have sworn they just put somebody else in his jersey and in his helmet and they were playing, because the decision-making, the accuracy, the touch, and most importantly, the play under pressure last year when facing the blitz, when facing more than 5 guys coming at him, when facing even just like a 4-man blitz where there's pressure that was recorded. He was awesome. Now, there's still consistency with him that I want to see last year as a building block, but he showed you what you wanted to see last year from a potential top 50 NFL pick. And so those wow moments. I talked about some of the best throws from J.J. McCarthy. If you put the best throws from Bo Nix together, I mean, again, you're going to be able to put down a first-round resume. So for him this year, the turnover-worthy plays, we got to keep them down. We want to keep the big-time throws up as if this isn't a massive duh, but let's continue to play really well under pressure. Because if you give me 2 back-to-back years of a guy who could play really well under pressure, has good decision-making, can see things pre-snap and post-snap, knows where to go with the ball, can fire it in there quickly, and he's got enough athleticism to be a decent RPO option, or at least somebody that the defense has to account for. Like he feels kind of like a Daniel Jones type of guy where it's like, all right, I don't know if you're going to base a whole rushing attack or a whole RPO system around him, but he'll definitely hurt you with his legs if you give him a little bit of space. That's kind of how I feel about about Bo Nix right now as a prospect. So a lot of good stuff last year. Felt night and day different from what he was when he was at Auburn. So I just want to see it once Oregon really starts to ramp up their schedule this year. Let's see it again.
Yeah, I thought he had an impressive passing range. Like you said, he's got touch. He's got the ability to do a lot of different throws. Very good processing in the pocket. Like him, I think you hit the nail on the head. His ability to see it pre and post snap, like work through a progression, understand the defense, that was impressive. Really, the only thing I would want to see from him more, certainly, like again, based on 2 games, is like I want more big plays, right? Like you're clearly good. You've shown the ability to not screw it up, to read the defense, to understand what's happening. Now let's be a bit more aggressive and go make a few bigger plays out there, because if you can put that on the table, then we're talking about something legit. Of these 4 guys, so let's talk in terms of first rounders. We were talking about QB3. For me, QB3 out of those 4 is Sanders. How many of the 4 for you are first round picks as of now?
How many would I have first round grades on, or how many do I think the NFL would draft in the first round? Because it's a little bit different of a question.
Well, let's go one then the other.
Okay, so guys that I think could get drafted in the first round, all of them, genuinely. Like the most quarterbacks we've ever had drafted in the first round is 5, and that's happened twice, I believe. I really do think we're going to get 6 this year. I think we're going to break the record this year. It depends how desperate some of these teams are going to be for a quarterback and whether they think they can wait, because it's also going to be a very, very deep class. But you can convince yourself that Ewers has an unbelievable arm and you can make something out of it. You could say the same with J.J. McCarthy. You could tell yourself that the accuracy and football IQ with Shedeur Sanders just doesn't come around very often. I think he could get drafted in the first round. And I think with Bo Nix, again, like you said, if we see more big-time throws from him, that play under pressure, that dual threat ability, it's definitely there for him. Again, going back to Daniel Jones can go as high as he did, and I understand it was Dave Gettleman. I'm not sure anybody else would have been drafting him that high. But I think Daniel Jones probably would have went in the first round that year. Maybe not as high as he went, but he would have gone in the first round. I feel the same about Bo Nix. And so I think all 4 of them could absolutely go in the first round. I'll stick with Nix as my QB3 because going into the season, we haven't really learned a ton since then. I'll say Nix is still my QB3. I have Penix as my QB4, but in this list, I believe it would be Ewers is next. And then I think McCarthy and Sanders, but man, I think I have all of these guys in my top 60 now. And when we update the big board in a couple of weeks, if these guys keep putting together really great numbers consistently, they're only going to rise because quarterbacks of paramount importance when it comes to where you put guys in a big board. So that's probably how I would list it. Of the guys that we named, Nix, Ewers, McCarthy, Sanders.
I think based off just watching these guys through the first couple of weeks, I think Sanders is a first-round pick, clearly. I think McCarthy is a first-round pick. I could see Bo Nix getting into the first round, though I'm less sure on that. Ewers, to me, feels more like a day 2 kind of guy. But I agree with you. That's all right. Like, if you count Caleb Williams and Drake May in there as well, that's 5 that I have going in there. So I haven't looked at any of the other guys that we're talking about, in the same kind of category for potentially QB3. So I could easily see there being 5 or 6.
I think Michael Penix is also from Washington, at least in that conversation for guys that can be top 50 first round picks. I know he's got a bad injury history to him, but if he has another fully healthy year, I think he can put a decent amount of that behind him, and he could also be in the first round there. So I was actually talking with Brad Spielberger before the show, but it's going to always feel weird listing the quarterbacks in this class numerically, because a guy who could be QB3 is going to be somebody's QB8. And the truth about it is the distance between QB3 and QB8 in this class is going to be way smaller than I think anybody is used to.
Right.
And so I feel as though numerical rankings are going to get some good social media engagement this year because you can ask 10 different guys, and I think they'd have a different order for all of them because there's a ton of talent.
Yeah, people are going to get blowtorched for putting the consensus QB3 at like QB8, 9, and it's pretty close. There's not going to be that big a gap.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
That's going to do it for today's show. Tomorrow, I think what's going to happen, Steve's on the road later this week, so I think we're going to bump the preview show up a day. So we're going to do a Wednesday preview show this week, a 2.5-hour marathon as it's probably going to end up being. And we're going to be a day even more ignorant on injury news. So that's going to be, I wouldn't be putting a ton of bets off the preview show we're doing this week, put it that way. Thursday show, TBD, and then I think Brad Spielberger is going to be showing up for our Friday show, and potentially Vic Trohad, our medical expert, if only there was an injury or two that we could talk about this week. Trev, it's been a pleasure, good sir. Thank you for educating us all on the 2024 quarterbacks and talking Jets bars, the real information everyone needed today.
I appreciate it, man. Anytime. I'm excited that we get to talk more draft on this show throughout the year because this is the class to do it. It's going to be a ton of fun, man.
Yeah, it's perfect. I mean, it's going to help all of our listeners get a head start. It's going to help me actually watch some college football before the draft season, which can't be a bad thing. So Trev's going to be here every week on Tuesdays. Hopefully you've enjoyed listening to the show, and we'll see you tomorrow.